Hello and welcome to a brand new video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking FPL, specifically we're going to be talking midfielders. Similarly to the defenders video we did a couple days ago, I'm going to be talking about a few options in the three different price categories that we have in FPL for midfielders this year. First of which is your premium options, which are players that are 10 million and above. Secondly is the mid-range section, which this year I've gone for 7 million to 8.5. The reason being is because there actually is no midfielder 9 or 9.5 million this year. And then thirdly, but not finally, we have our cheaper options, your budget options, the players that are facilitators for your club to get in the players you need to advance through the leagues this season. So without further ado, let's get straight into the midfielders. So starting at the top, starting with our premium options, quite an easy one to start off with. You have Mohamed Salah. He's a must pick. Over the last 5 seasons that Salah has been in the league, he has averaged a total of 258 points per season. Now this equates on a weekly basis to 6.8 points every single game week. So it's an absolute no-brainer that Salah has to be in every single team for this season. Now picking another player from the premium category isn't so easy. We're quite thin on the ground with options this season, with Son, De Bruyne, Fernandes still pulling up the rear at 10 mil, along with Raheem Sterling. These aren't the usual top picks that we've seen in previous seasons. However, there is one standout out of the 4. And that player for me, despite his increase in value this season, is Heung-min Son. The reason being is that he managed to amass 33 goals and assists last season. Now, whilst he did overperform, only having an expected goals and assist output of 25, I think that under Conte, as we saw at the back end of last season, Son can really thrive, and I suspect his numbers and underlying numbers for his expected figures will improve in line with what he will score this season also. Spurs are going to be a dangerous threat this season, and I wouldn't be surprised at all, as I've said in my predictions video, if they are actually able to challenge the top 2. And with the firepower of both Kane and Son up front, Son is an absolute no-brainer, as he's still classified as a midfielder despite playing almost every single game up front. Therefore, he has that edge on the other midfielders that we would consider. Sterling feels to me a bit of a risk, has the output at Man City, he's shown it for many years before, but under a Thomas Tuchel system that really struggles to utilise its wingers and wing options, and especially to get them in position to score goals, as we've seen for every single striker that has left Chelsea since Diego Costa, I still think the transition for Sterling, despite me having faith that he will deliver, will still be harder than the other options at this price level. Bruno Fernandes, I think, is a difficult player to pick. If Ronaldo had left the club, I think Bruno Fernandes would be in a lot more of our teams. It's very clear that those two players can't play together for club or country. So whilst Ronaldo still remains at the club and looks likely to debutise the start of this season due to Anthony Martial's injury, I think Bruno Fernandes is a bit of a no-go at this stage. And then finally in the premium options, you have Kevin De Bruyne, a player that is picked by over 20% of people so far this season. And I think on paper it appears to be a good option. In the Community Shield final, he played very high up the pitch, looking like he was more in his favourite attacking midfield role that we used to see him many years ago at Wolfsburg. However, I still worry about De Bruyne's output. Last season, he beat his expected goals figure by 9 goals. Absolutely phenomenal that he was able to do that, but extremely unlikely that that will repeat this season. Therefore, for 12 million, I think De Bruyne may actually be a bit overpriced, and personally, I'm going to be steering clear and opt for different City options that we'll talk about later in the video. So, for me, from the premium section, you want to be picking Salah. If not, or you've got the money to do both, also then Son. Okay, now we're into the mid-range of players, which is 7 million to roughly 8.5 million. Now, there's a lot of options here this season, especially at that £8 million mark. You have players such as Diaz, Foden, Mahrez, Kulusevski, Maddison, Mason Mount. The list is pretty long, and a lot of these players are going to be fantastic options for your FPL teams. In fact, I would probably recommend that you have at least 1, if not 2 or 3 of these £8 million midfielders in your team, as if there is a difference in how players perform to what we believe they will in the first week or 2, or they pick up an injury, you'll be able to move your team around quickly whilst only making 1 transfer, rather than having to make 2 if prices change or you've picked players either higher or lower in value in the midfield position. So very simply, if you're able to pick these £8 million midfielders, you can get to each other in one move. There's no point hit that is going to need to be taken. Now, specifically picking one of these players, if you were to pick one, is quite difficult because they all have very good claims to be in your team. I think that realistically the best player on that list, in my opinion, is probably Luis Diaz. Now that Mane has left Liverpool, that left flank does definitely feel like his to claim. In addition, he's played there in almost every single pre-season game for Liverpool this season, as Darwin Núñez has been pushed into a more of a forward role and Diogo Jota is currently out injured. But even when he does play, he often appears in that striker position too. Therefore, I think Diaz probably is the best £8 million midfielder. However, there's plenty of others, as we've discussed, that you can consider. For example, at Man City, Mahrez and Foden could become really good options this season now that Sterling and Jesus have both been sold. That was their rotational depth in those positions. And whilst we still have Grealish on the left, I feel like Mahrez with that left foot of his could really nail down that right-sided position and could be a great option for the first time this season, probably since Leicester won the league. Saka appears to be on Arsenal's penalties as well, which could be a really good option for a very fluid front line of Jesus, Odegaard, Martinelli and Saka. I think there are potentially better options in that Arsenal team in the fact that Martinelli is £2 million cheaper, in addition to already having an Arsenal spot guaranteed to be taken essentially with Jesus, which we'll talk about more in the striking episode. However, if you're not too keen on having an £8 million midfielder, or at least more than one, then you may also want to consider the following players. Jack Grealish is priced at $7 million this season and looks to be a starter in that Man City team, already having set up Haaland in pre-season. Coutinho has now been made permanent by Aston Villa and could really look to push on this season. Last season he was still able to put up over 3 shots per game, which really indicates that there's more to come from him, and I certainly suspect to see him in the goals and also the assists a lot more this season, and for $7 million could be fantastic value. If you're looking to go against the grain slightly, you could look to Manchester United, as Sancho is available for $7.5 million this season, $2 million less than what he was last time. Again, he's looked lively pre-season and has been more out on the right-hand side in the position that we were used to seeing him before in the Bundesliga. However, there are still questions around this United front three with Ronaldo seemingly to come back into it. Will they be able to be as fluid as we'd like to see this team play? The question is still there, so it's a risk at $7.5 million, but if you want to stand out and you want to be having a play that most people won't have, Sancho could be a good option. Okay, so as you've probably realised, picking 3 players from this section is quite hard, but if I had to recommend 3, they would be Luis Diaz due to the amount of game time he should have for a top team, it would be Jack Grealish for almost the exact same reasons, and also Saka, because Arsenal have looked very good in pre-season, and if he's on penalties, that could pull in a lot of extra points that he didn't even get last season. Finally, we're into our cheaper options, and there are actually really good options in FPL this season for players in midfield that are $6.5 million or less. The standout player when the list came out for me was certainly Marcus Rashford. It was only a couple seasons ago where this man was hitting double digits for both goals and assists, and I think he could have a real resurgence under Ten Hag this season. He's looked good in pre-season and looks much happier around the squad compared to how he was last season, and I think we could see something quite special from him this season. And at $6.5 million, I think he's a really good option worth considering. After that, we've got a player we mentioned earlier from Arsenal, and that's Martinelli. He seems to have nailed down that left side flank now, and last season he was able to pull up 12 goals and assists in 1800 minutes, which is a really nice return from a player that was still 20 years old. So like Rashford, I think he may be able to push on this season, and he's shown a consistent rise in form over the last few seasons that could see him really explode into the player that we expect him to be this time around. And the final 2 options I think you should consider are Pedro Neto at Wolves and also Leon Bailey at Aston Villa. Now these players, especially Leon Bailey, have really grown in popularity in terms of ownership over the last few weeks. Both have played really well in pre-season and both look like they could be starters, or almost certain starter in Pedro Neto's case, for the upcoming season. Now Leon Bailey especially has quite a lot to prove. He performed very poorly last season, only picking up 3 goals and assists in 800 minutes in the league. However, I'm really expecting Leon Bailey to push on this season. The form he showed in pre-season is the player that we thought they were buying in from Leverkusen in the first place. And with Pedro Neto, the Jimenez injury will definitely mean he is guaranteed to play every game until he at least comes back. I do worry for Wolves, however. I think the loss of Jimenez up front could be quite catastrophic. I know they've brought in Hwang and also have players like Daniel Podence, but this is a very small attack. They don't have a whole lot of aerial threat now without Jimenez in the team to be able to hold up the ball, which Wolves rely on very heavily. So I actually feel like Pedro Neto could be a risk, and for that reason I think Leon Bailey may be the best option out of the two, especially given that he's 0.5 million less than Pedro Neto this season. Therefore, my 3 recommendations at this price category are Marcus Rashford at 6.5, Martinelli at 6 million, and Leon Bailey at 5 million. He could be a real budget asset for this season, and he makes my team. And that's it, guys. That's the end of our deep dive into midfielders and who you should pick at all 3 price options for the upcoming season. Now, I hope you enjoyed the video and got something from it that would be beneficial in terms of picking your team for the start of the Premier League, which, as I'm filming, is actually today. I'm super excited. If you guys are too, if you could leave a like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the later updates that I will be posting of strikers and who you should pick there too. Finally, if you want to continue the conversation with me on socials, my Twitter is @mturnbull78, and my Depop page, if you want to buy any authentic football shirts like the one you see behind me, is also @mturnbull78. Both will be down in the description below. And that's it, guys. Thank you very much for watching and supporting the channel, and I will see you in the next one.